Here we go.
So our practice today will be around 90 minutes. So probably we won't have a break, right? So, but if we need, maybe we can have a 5 minutes break, and it's up to Neil. And so just ask you to turn off your alerts and have less distractions around you or in your devices. If you can mute your cell phone, and yeah, so just to be here. And so please write one intention for this session. So what is your intention? You don't need to share that. It's just for you. So take a minute and write down in a paper what is your intention.
And all children, husbands,
Are welcome.
wives are very welcome. And also pets.
And pets, yeah.
Pandemic time.
Okay, so now I will ask you to stop your video for a while. And so just be present. If you want to stretch a little bit, someone is in the end of the day, some people are in the beginning of the day. Just stretch your body and have a deep breath. Be aware of your body. Be aware of your breathing. And come back.
Nice.
It's with you, Fernando.
Okay, so just a very welcome to everyone. For those who are coming for the first time, welcome. For the long time people coming, welcome again. And just for you to know what we'll be doing is this space is as we do in an outdoor bound expedition, we just take care of 3 things in this order. So basically we need to be safe in the outdoors. Here in the virtual the same. And we need to have fun. And then maybe we learn something, but the goal is first to be safe and then to have fun, and maybe you can learn something. So it's a very open space for people to try things. So if you want to try things in a near future, get in touch with us and you can arrange a session and bring people from all over. So we have people from Norway, from Mexico, Canada, United States. So it's a very diverse and gentle crowd to test things so far. And today we have Neil. Neil is a friend of us. And actually he lives like 50 meters from our house. We are really close neighbors. And the funny part is that we were introduced from a person who lives in another province. So he called us, you have to know Neil. He's a nice guy and we need to talk with him. And then we get in contact. So where are you? So I'm here. Oh, I'm on your side. So, and then we met. He did a facilitation workshop with us, and he has a very interesting practice about psychological safety. And that's more or less what we'll be doing today. So Neil, it's all with you now. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Fernando. It was quite funny to meet Fernando and Carolina, because there's a tree fort that I can see from my house that is right below their deck. So that is how close we are. But to start off with, we're going to go into a little bit of impromptu networking, and then I'll sort of introduce myself and the agenda for the rest of the day. But the questions for the impromptu networking will be: where are you from? What is your usual work environment? And when you hear the term psychological safety, what comes up for you? as we break out into pairs for everyone to spend a couple of minutes together. Those 3 questions. So where are you from? What is your usual work environment? And when you hear the term psychological safety, what comes up for you?
Yeah, I put the questions in the chat.
Thank you.
So, as you know, 4 minutes, and we'll show up with someone in a room, 4 minutes for you both to talk, and then we'll be dragged back, and then we'll mix it up and do it again. So we do it 3 times, so we have time to meet 3 people. And here we go. Stephanie, you're staying with me. Let me just check.
Whoops, there.
Because we are an event group, so you stay here.
Well, I'm from Portland, Oregon.
Putting in your name, it's nice to have the...
Yeah, I normally do that. It's just been one of those mornings. I'll be glad when the whole kitchen remodel is complete.
So tell me, especially, you don't work in a company, right? You are
right. I work for myself, independent
Yeah.
consultant, and in the midst of doing a partnership with another person. So that's kind of fun right now. I work at home. I have been working from home for about a little over 10 years. So I have a pretty good environment set up, except when the kitchen is happening. Psychological safety. That is, ever since Google came up with that term, I've really been excited to learn more about it, because that's been the missing ingredient in high performance teams that I hadn't been able to articulate before that word came up.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think of psychological safety, I think of a place where someone can be their best without judgment.
Hello, Joanne.
Hello.
We are just doing the impromptu networking.
Okay.
So you'll be in a room in, let me see, we have 2 more minutes.
Sure.
So I will just put the questions on the chat. So welcome, Gabriela. We are just discussing these 3 questions. So if you want to go forward.
Okay.
The topic today is psychological safety. So we have Neil as a special guest who will be leading us in some experiments. But first we need to know, when you hear this term psychological safety, what comes up to you?
For me, it's just people being able to be in an environment where they can be vulnerable. So just knowing that there's a suspension of judgment.
Yeah, for me, it's funny because I have been working with corporate training for a long time. And maybe around like 15 or 10 years ago, there was a buzzword about trust, a lot of workshop of trust. Let's build trust and trust. But I personally thought that's not the issue. There's something underneath this. And I don't know what it is, but it's not about trust. And then when this word came up, I said, oh, that's more comprehensive. That's more like kind of foundation. And then we build trust, maybe. So it's interesting. When I was discussing with Neil, I was looking for this for a long time. So people are coming back. And now I have more people in the room, Neil.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, we have 3 more people. So in 20 seconds, people will be back here. For those who didn't saw the introduction, Neil Pretty is the guest facilitator today, a special guest. So he'll be leading us. But let's first get together a little bit more. 5 seconds, people will be back. Okay.
As always, was too short.
As always. Okay, I think we are even again. Okay, 4 minutes. Here we go. Oh, again. People will be flooding the room in 5 seconds. Here we are.
It's 18's our number, so is everybody back?
Yes.
Looks like everybody's back. Okay. Well, I guess I'm in the driver's seat, so I'll make that happen. Hopefully everybody had a nice time meeting new people, sharing time with some people you already knew. But otherwise, I'm going to launch right into it. So I'm going to just share my screen quickly here. I made a point of making this as few slides as possible. So I think the total slide count is 7, including welcome. So, but just to give you a little overview of who I am. So, Pretty, yes, that's actually my last name. Somebody had to have it, so I got it. And the mustache is purely to fulfill the promise. That's it. So I'm a CEO of Aristotle Performance. I've been an entrepreneur in some way. I've owned 5 or 6 businesses, 11 years old, actually. But I'm a people development consultant and coach. I worked as a life coach and coach working with CEOs and executive suite individuals, everything from laborers all the way up to executive suite. So I've run the gamut of who I've worked with and became one of 12 coaches certified globally as the first cohort in the world to scan, track, and improve psychological safety. So that was sort of the beginning for me in this world was that first certification. And then there was 16 of us, and then there was 12 of us that took the next level of training at Harvard here. And we've been kind of building the plane as we're flying it. How do we take this work that's typically been scholastic and academic and research based and make it practical and real and actually make an impact for organizations? So part of my journey was leading well over 300 teams and coaching hundreds of people, and then coming to this, and that actually ended up getting me the title of one of Vancouver's top 100 innovators, which was an interesting honor to have sort of thrown in my lap unexpectedly. So the goal of today's session and what I want to be up to for the day with all of us, my intention is really taking the abstract and making it real. So going from that, this research-based thing that has, psychological safety, what is that? And making it actually tangible so that we can feel what it's actually like, because that is really what makes it stick. So we'll be going through what psychological safety is, how we measure psychological safety, the blueprint for teams, and that's some of the research. And that is basically the end of the slides, so you won't have the pain of just watching slides all day. And then we're going to do a series of 2 breakout rooms, and I'll pre-frame those breakout rooms and make sure everyone has the material to go into those breakout rooms and have hopefully a nice discussion where we can share some stories and some of the impact of those stories around psychological safety. And at the end of that, I'll share some about my experiences and some of the impact, and then what you can do with some of the information that's come out of those breakout rooms, and then open it up to the floor for Q&A and just general discussion. And my goal is to try to have a nice solid chunk of time for that. So what is psychological safety? One of my favorite quotes is, "No one comes up with a good idea while being chased by a tiger." hence the tiger. And this is really where psychological safety comes from, the ability to be your whole self without the fear of interpersonal risk. So that moment where someone says, do you have any questions? And nobody sticks up their hand. Or that moment where you've witnessed someone be berated for a mistake, so you hide your mistake. These things affect teams at a very deep level, and it's rooted in our human biology, because as human beings, we understand that in groups, we are inherently more safe than we are alone, because we might be chased by a tiger. So we're constantly navigating that interpersonal space to make sure that we stay a part of the group. So it's really simple. And I often say to people, do you have any questions at this, at this sort of juncture? I often just ask that. And that moment where you just gauged what was going on in the room, is it okay? That is psychological safety in action in real time. And it's something that we can measure, and it actually has a massive effect on performance as well as how people experience work. So the blueprint for team performance is largely based on Google's Rework project. Google studied 15,000 people over 5 years and they had around 200 metrics for this is what a successful team will complete on. This is where they will be better. And they came up with 5 different areas. And originally they came up with 4. They came up with impact, meaning, structure and clarity, and dependability. Those are things people need in a team. And they were stumped because there was teams that had low performance that had these 4 things. And there was teams that had high performance that had impact, meaning, structure and clarity, and dependability. So there was a missing link. And the missing link was psychological safety. And when they stumbled upon the work of Amy Edmondson, they started scanning based on a 7-question questionnaire that she has. And they realized that what it actually was, it was the gatekeeper. If there was psychological safety, impact, meaning, structure and clarity, and dependability were actually started to matter. They started to make a difference. So it correlated with around 43%, and 23 years of research. It's consistently been somewhere between 40 and 45% of overall team performance is correlated strongly to psychological safety. So we're going to move through this pretty quickly, but we're going to be going into these breakout rooms. And this is something that when we're prefacing a dialogue session with teams or any kind of group of people, I always like to think about confidentiality, remaining curious and open. So asking what questions instead of why questions, avoid fear, and avoid trying to make things better. And just, especially as a group of experienced facilitators, often people will talk about EQ, IQ, and SQ, and this is one of those things that can really affect sort of that spiritual quotient, that energy in the room. Emotions are data and part of the dialogue. So as we're sharing stories, what is that's coming up for you? As you notice emotions is a really relevant question, and really listening to understand and having permission to challenge directly. Permission to ask people to go deeper and challenge what's going on. So I'm in the next slide, there's going to be a series of 7 questions. Those 7 questions, what I would like all of you to do is read those 7 questions, and as a story comes up, a story that you remember, and hopefully it'll be something that just sort of comes to mind. Whatever is first to mind is probably the most appropriate story to discuss. And when we go into the breakout rooms, what I'd like you to do is share those stories. So please share that story, and what was it like, share the story and the impact it had on you at the time, and potentially the impact it had on the organization, on the team, on the group. What impacts did that scenario have on you, and what was going on around you? So I'll move on to the next slide, and please just take 1 minute to read the 7 questions, and then Fernando will take us out into the breakout rooms where everyone will have a chance to share, and we'll post the questions in the chat.
So Neil, I have the triads.
Yeah.
And the time will be 14 minutes. So it's a little bit more than 4 minutes for each person.
Great.
And then you'll be back. So, and if you need any help or support, just ask for help in your breakout rooms, and one of us will be there with you. Bon voyage.
Rewind.
Yeah, so it's the psychological safety is constantly being engaged and up and down. So yeah, one sarcastic phrase in particular, like sarcastic comedy, is particularly detrimental to psychological safety because people don't know where it lands, and not everybody takes sarcasm the same. But in a dialogue session, you'll see it in a group where people will actually, somebody will say something and everybody's being polite, everybody's being nice, they're talking about the weather, and then somebody says something that might be offensive or might ask a question that somebody isn't quite comfortable with, and everybody will posture.
Mm-hmm.
So when everybody's in politeness, they're part of the whole. And then when that moment happens, that's breakdown. So everybody's breaking down and breaking off, and they're like in protection mode. And then what people do is they want to be part of the whole. So they go back. So somebody will say a joke that like lightens the mood, and that takes people back to politeness. But to actually move into a dialogue requires inquiry. And what inquiry does, that really, those powerful, meaningful questions actually take people into new information. And a dialogue, sort of a flowing dialogue, follows that inquiry as people sort of hold that heat between, or do we go to being more polite again and just being nice, or do we keep digging into this? And then once it's sort of dug into, all the group kind of comes along, and then they come back to being part of the whole. And then the whole is formed again, but there's new information being shared. And that you'll notice that in leadership and in teams, that hub and spoke style conversation where the leader goes like, okay, you report in, you report in, you report in, you report in. They're often stuck in that politeness breakdown loop. Mm-hmm. Because nobody's asking meaningful questions. And once people move to that sort of zigzag, member to member feedback, there's more of this dialogue, and that's simply through good questions. So part of creating and recreating psychological safety as it breaks down or reforms, it's really through inquiry is the main method that it's delivered with.
So the leaders need to learn how to perceive this breakdown moment and also how to get things back on the rails, right?
Yeah, exactly. What's interesting about Google's rework project is they also studied through Project Oxygen what makes a good leader. And this is where the whole leader as coach story and narrative came from, was from Project Oxygen. Leaders should have coaching capabilities. And what is a coach other than a person who really just knows how to ask great questions?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So that's what we teach leaders. I think coaching for leaders is very different than coaching for coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the next thing. We take people through our leadership performance, and then the next thing after that is a coaching program that we're actually putting together. So it's like a whole year-long process.
Nice.
Okay, I'll put here.
Was that a story you've shared before? Yeah.
Here they are.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. What we'd like to do now is just ask you to post in the chat what was it like to share your story, and I'm also particularly curious, was that a new story or was that a story you've shared before? So maybe just new or old, and what was it like to share that story with a couple of people? Emotional to listen and share. Yeah. When we work with particularly executive teams, the the higher we scan up in an organization, typically the lower the psychological safety, because there's a lot more at stake. People are a lot more protectionist, and we'll often work with groups once every 2 months or once every quarter and scan the psychological safety and then debrief through dialogue. And we'll present learning models and stuff in situ, sort of as needed and as is relevant. But it's often the only time that those people actually have an opportunity to be real. One executive team, that was the only time they met annually, was the quarterly retreats and the Christmas party. Very new, happened last week. Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. I'm noticing a pattern in here that old but with new understanding. So I'm wondering if that's due to a new perspective of psychological safety or something else that's come up. Yeah, more details. Yeah, really good time and good listeners. Yeah, certainly a group of facilitators and coaches and whatnot. Capable question askers and capable listeners. So as we go into the next breakout, we're going to ask everyone to just take 2 minutes to self-reflect on a couple of questions and then go back into the groups and share about the reflections you've had. So the 2 questions that I'd like to everyone to consider are, how are you different because of this story? How did your values, beliefs, or behaviors change because of this story? And we'll just give 2 minutes to reflect, and then
question you, because we shared the story or because
of the actual story itself. Thank you for that.
The actual story. Okay.
Yeah, what changed?
Time to open up the rooms. Here we go. 15 seconds, Neil, for them to come back.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. So Carolina was gracious enough to post a question in the chat as well. But I'm curious, did you learn or realize something new or did you learn or realize something new about someone else? We'll just give a quick
in the
minute.
Chat, right?
Yeah, sorry, I'll just have a quick minute to post a response in the chat. And there was a question posted in the chat before everyone went into the breakout room that was what made this group feel so available to share this story, and was it that it was a new group or what? And I think that there is what I've noticed as we debrief teams and as we work with groups of people around this topic, there's two things. One, often, in a new group where there's little long-term interpersonal risk. So psychological safety, when it's low, makes people myopic. You're worried about the immediate risk as opposed to the long-term risk. In a moment, I'll share a couple of stories around that, but that can help make the group of new people feel more available to listen. But then there's also this container. This is the space. This is where, and what we try to do is avoid our dialogue sessions with groups becoming a place where people can have an airing of the grievances. So we try to have it be, this is the container where we really go deep, but these are the practices you can take into your daily work that sort of maintain that container in the broader work environment as well. So it's sort of both of those things. New groups can lead to a more psychologically safe environment, or for some people, completely the opposite experience. And the container building, having it be the space for it. So I'm seeing some great conversations. This is wonderful stuff. So now that reinforced my beliefs about human beings, we share same fears. Yeah, absolutely. I think the degrees of separation between human beings is a lot smaller than we think it is. So there's also a question of trust and psychological safety came up, and what's the difference between trust and psychological safety? And psychological safety is something you are constantly gauging. There's this constant, like, this is where do I sit? Where do I fit? So effectively, psychological safety is what the group gives you, and trust is what you give them in return. So now that you feel psychologically safe, you'll trust them to continue keeping you psychologically safe. And there will be individuals that break that down or not. So trust is the other direction. So now that you've been examining these stories a little bit, I'd like to share one of my own stories, because the real question is, so now what? And it's, what do you do now? Now that there's this story out there in the world, what is so about that story? And I think that there's a really interesting way to frame these stories, in that they are only stories. Sadly, our memories are flawed, but what we do is we internalize our stories, and then we look for reaffirmation, because then we stay safe. And the methodology around breaking stories down into facts is actually how we can get some forward movement on having these stories not have the same kind of impact that they would have if we just carried the story around. So recently I was part of a group where everyone was volunteers, and there was approximately 24 people in the group. And the group had been given free rein to go forth and create activities and basically do business development and idea generation to get money for a group. There was significant forward motion, there was significant strides being made, and there was a CEO who came into the group and berated everyone because they weren't doing the things the way she wanted them to be done. And she got on the Zoom call and screamed at everyone for an hour. And at the end of that hour, most people were shaking. Several people had anxiety attacks. And it continued. Later that week, there was a team call, or team leader call. The team leaders were also berated. Again, for another hour, they were yelled at. The following Tuesday, there was another round of people belittled, berated, called out. And eventually what happened was there was a dialogue session with that CEO where it was revealed, where it was effectively communicated that this was inappropriate behavior and it shouldn't continue. She agreed. She was contrite. And then on the weekend, she proceeded to call each person that was in that dialogue session and provide them with an hour of being yelled at. So there was this situation after situation where she would violently, verbally attack people. And what was interesting about that story is that the story that was in her was actually the story that caused all of this anger and to pour out and be put on other people. Most of the people that were involved in those incidences left, and they were raising money for people in Africa who were starving. And they simply left because the CEO was yelling at them all the time. And the story for her was that these people were idiots. They had no idea what they were doing, and they were going to completely disintegrate and dismantle all the work she'd done to create this not-for-profit organization. But the truth was not the same. The truth was that there was lots of opportunity for copy to be edited, for all these things. Nothing was going out without permission. But she had this fear that somehow she would be found out. The facts of that story were actually that she was scared. She was scared that her work would be undone. Nobody had done anything wrong. And my invitation is to do like I had to do in that situation and go, am I being attacked? Are these other people being attacked? What's going on? Or is that person in fear? I'll briefly share another quick story of a time that I was back in the day when I was an iron worker. So I used to climb steel and install steel on buildings. There was a guy who I watched, and he was cutting the grating out from underneath him for a 50-foot fall if he continued to cutting. So I left my post, went up and said, hey, you're cutting the grating out from underneath yourself. Get out of here. He was really mad and upset that I said anything to him. I said, okay, well, I'd said my piece and went back down to my post, and my foreman started yelling at me. And so in this one situation where I had gone out of my way to help somebody, hopefully saving their life and at least injury, they were mad, and this other person was mad. So I had the option of taking that on, or I had the option of understanding the deeper facts of the story. The story was this foreman was a jerk because he was yelling at me. But the truth of that story is that he was scared because if somebody hadn't caught the fact that this guy was cutting the grating out from underneath him, his whole livelihood could have been at stake. He could have lost his job. Under his watch, somebody could have fallen 50 feet. He said to me, just let him fall, then he'll learn. But that was him trying to be a tough guy, trying to tough guy his way out of a situation where he was extremely scared. So what does this do? So, I mean, how would you handle these stories, a client with these stories? You know, what would you do with a team? So getting teams to talk about these stories and then talk about the facts around the stories as opposed to all the intangibles around the story are really the most effective way to get people to move forward. The edge effect happens in ecology when two ecological systems come together. And that's where the greatest zone of differentiation is in nature. And on teams and relationships, that's where the greatest amount of innovation, productivity, sharing of ideas, that's where it happens as well. So sharing these stories and then in groups, deepening the relationship by going into what is so versus what is the story, deepens those relationships and improves team experiences and teamwork, team performance. But where I always like to go with this is that, and I think this was actually in the copy for this event, was that everything in life is a series of conversations. That everything that you have, will have, or want to have is a conversation or a series of conversations away. And everything in life is part of that. We're lucky enough to share space today. And I always say the greatest return on investment for a conversation was your birth. So whenever people ask me if I really mean it, I really mean it. So hopefully that gave everyone a chance today to experience conversation and some dialogue around psychological safety, experience maybe changing the script on a story that had some impact in your life or in your work or in some other situation. And otherwise, I'd love to share some time just having general dialogue, or if anybody has any questions, that would be lovely.
So we will have 10 minutes after our closing here. So if you have questions for Neil, we can have that time. And also if you have questions, but you have to leave, so you can just put your question post in the chat, and then we record the answer. And just to close our session here, we would like you to revisit your intention for the session and write in the chat, how are you living today? Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. Hopefully that was meaningful.
Let's find out. Did I break the safety in the room with this comment?
We were talking about that earlier. Wonderful.
I was chatting with Marianne. We put you back in the same group on purpose, just to keep you in the same group that you created some level of safety, and you can go deeper as well. If you mix people again, probably you have to build all that container again, so it can be not so productive. That was an experiment.
Yeah, and I'd like everyone to know as well that we're, this is a sort of shameless plug, but we're actively looking for facilitators to take a small training course with us. And we have global clients. So if anybody's interested in pursuing work around psychological safety, I would love for you to connect with me, and I mean, and for anyone to connect with me anyways. I'd love to connect with people. So that's one of my highest values. So if anyone wants to connect, I'd love to do that. And if you're interested in doing psychological safety work or work with teams, please reach out as well. When you start to work with a team, how do you begin psychological safety construction? How do you start, when you say psychological safety construction, how do you start building it?
I open, yes.
Andrea, yeah.
I open my mic.
Yeah. Andrea, so yeah, how do you start building psychological safety with a team?
Yes.
The first step is we run a scan. So then we know, and then we get, there's 4 domains. So we have psychological safety, then we have attitude to risk and failure, willingness to help, open conversation, and inclusion and diversity.
You apply a questionnaire, right?
Yeah. So that's,
okay. I know. Okay.
Those 7 questions provide us with that feedback. And then we talk to the group about it. And what comes up are stories about what's going on and how that's affecting people. And then over time, we build skills to change behavior.
Okay. So if I understood, the start of everything, it's very similar to what you proposed to us. It's just, let's start talking about the stories that are around the team and probably helping them focus on facts and then understand what's really behind. Does it make sense what I'm saying here?
Yeah, completely. So I'll give you a perfect example. I worked with an inclusion and diversity team that struggled with inclusion, very deeply with inclusion. And I'll also share that in almost every debrief, there is at least one person that has a rather emotional event where they're, crying or some kind of emotional outburst. Sometimes it's anger, which is, always fun to handle as a facilitator. But through that, it was identified that there was actually one person that was the main sort of purveyor of a lot of the exclusion that was going on. And there was some strategic conversations that were had after to make some structural changes in the organization. Mm-hmm. So we try to avoid those fixing conversations. Mm-hmm. What we try to do is say, okay, can we book a time where you would discuss that specific strategic, so that the strategy is sort of kept out of it, so people can continue to go deeper in what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we are now officially in the question and answers. So anyway, we stay 10 minutes over time. So now it's 10:25 for us. So we stay until 10:40. Math is difficult for me. So Neil, you have questions in the chat?
Yeah, I'm just looking through. Is there any correlation between psychological safety framework and the trauma-informed practice? I'm not super familiar with trauma-informed practice, but what I do know is that when we go into a situation where there might be some sort of racial overtone or something like that, I have diversity and inclusion people that are specialists in that area that we bring in with us, because we talk about power, position, influence, authority, those kinds of things, and belonging. Whereas their expertise is significantly more focused on victimization, re-victimization, and those kinds of topics. So I always like to call in the people that have that specific knowledge for those situations. But what happens is in groups, people's childhood stories are very prevalent, because what actually happens when people in a group move from low stakes to high stakes, and what that means is not that it actually matters. It means that they've attached some high stake to it. People revert to their childhood self. So when I hear trauma-informed practice, my answer is maybe. Depends on what you mean by that, but certainly we often go into groups and end up discussing childhood traumas in group, and with executive teams, that is when we're getting the most powerful work. And we do we do try to be aware of it. So I hopefully that answers it. Yeah. Recommend some bibliography about psychological safety. So The Fearless Organization is a book written by Amy Edmondson. All the work we do is based on the work of Amy Edmondson. We're strategic partners with the Fearless Organization. We're trainers of that methodology. Yeah, so that should answer that. But that's probably the best place to start. Google's rework project is actually called Project Aristotle. That's focused on psychological safety. There's a great New York Times article about it. And if anybody wants any more information, please email me. I'll post that in the chat. Happy to connect with anyone at any time and provide more information or anything. Psychological safety with a class where the term is only 8 weeks long. I think it's important to create the container. It's really important to create the container and make that a space where people can fail. You know, what does failure look like, and how do we handle it is a really critical way. Even inclusion as simple as alphabetizing email addresses, so nobody wonders who's more important or less important on an email chain. Really, that's setting the stage of what is acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior. Asking people, getting buy-in for how things are going to be in the group, and then simply responding to that. If people are in line or out of line with those behaviors, making sure that if people are not demonstrating appropriate behaviors, to be very specific about the behavior, not who the person was, and how you would like to see it changed in private. And if it continues, to call it out. And sometimes it is appropriate in public, but often it needs to be done in private. But really very, very, very specific about the behavior. And then when people are doing great things, you know, sort of appreciating them broadly. It's a really good methodology for creating psychological safety, especially, and you can do it quickly. You can create that whole container in about an hour. I mean, really, we can do container building with groups in about 5 minutes. But creating group agreements, an hour. And then that 8 weeks is set up for greater success. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people are having to bump off. My email's in the chat, and happy to stay on if anybody has any more questions.
And maybe if you can make the questions verbally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wrote a question.
Other
I
voices.
think, I have a question. I wrote it, but I think you skip it. What do you do? Tell us about your experience when in a team, the culture of the organization, it's privilege the results instead of the relationship. So this psychological safety, it's not worth it for them. They do about it.
Yeah, so there's actually a 2x2 that's actually in Amy Edmondson's book. But what it is if you have low psychological safety and low performance accountability, people have apathy. Nobody cares. if there is high psychological safety but low performance accountability, I like to call this the Canadian problem. People feel like they can speak up and great, but there's like less performance accountability because everybody wants to be nice, right? That's like the nice zone. When there's high performance accountability and low psychological safety, we refer to that as the anxiety zone. So you've spent a ton of money training people, building team, onboarding people, recruiting, and then effectively create an environment where their anxiety will eventually catch up with them. You've got 18 months to get everything you can out of that person before that anxiety starts affecting their performance. 18 months to 2 years is the breaking point for people that are in those high pressure environments. So if you create psychological safety and performance accountability, yep, I see that, yep, I left at 18 months. That's, yeah, and that's a consistent 18 months to 2 years, boom, people are gone. So if you create psychological safety and performance accountability, what you actually get is referred to as the learning zone. Teams start to exhibit group learning behaviors where instead of having hub and spoke style conversations, they're sharing feedback with each other. The leader becomes more of a facilitator, then they become a director. And I know some organizations that have done that actually refer to their team leaders or team managers as team facilitators. And that can actually have a huge impact because if you consider SCARF models, BART models, all these different, boundary, role, authority, task, if you change just the title, that can often change how a person perceives their job. So on those high pressure, high performance teams, psychological safety is actually more important because that burnout is so expensive and it's so hard on people and families, and the downstream impact of that on people is massive. So the organizations that are in that zone actually have the most to gain.
Okay.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I work a lot with co-creation in big groups with lots of actors and kind of wicked problems that cannot be solved by a team alone, or not even by an organization, maybe not even by a nation. So also here, of course, the psychological safety is very important, but it's even more difficult because you don't have these are people coming in for an open space or another big adventure thing in order to have all their perspectives in on this wicked problem so that we can start seeing some solutions. Mm-hmm. And you still have to create in order to have their perspectives, you will have to have a psychological safety, but you don't have much time. So have you any experience with that? How you work with that in?
With large groups like that, I have less experience. But certainly I would go back to what is acceptable. How do we, and when I say what's acceptable, it's not just like, can you please turn your phones off? It's if someone brings up something that that triggers you, how are you going to respond to that trigger? Do you want to and what we would invite people to do is to respond to that trigger by taking a breath. I often have, it's usually the CEO says, I don't want any emotions in here, right? Okay, well, that's not acceptable. This is where this happens. So what we need to do is create group agreements so that the emotions that come up are handled appropriately by the group. So inviting people to respond to being confronted in a way that might be different than they would in their normal life. And particularly our work with leaders, we often discuss what is your own fight, flight, or freeze response, and how do you choose to respond to it? And that choice and really framing it as choice often flips people's mindset towards, oh, I need to be curious about my own reaction. And that's where emotions become data. So you go, wow, so I was really triggered by that and it brought up a lot of anger for me. Let's talk about that.
Thank you.
Any other question? We still have 3 minutes.
And I'd just like to say thanks to whoever wrote the Fearless Organization book in there, or Andrea, thank you. I was trying to get there, but it's hard to do.
I just shared 2 other pieces that I think it's interesting. There's a TED talk, and also where you can make the test, safety, psychological safety test for teams, right? It's for free from the Fearless Organization. So it's interesting for people that want to know the different dimensions that are measured.
Yeah, so that the Fearless Organization scan, that is the scan that we use. That exact free scan. And that's who we're certified through. And actually one of our advisors and business partner is one of the people that created that assessment. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Always a pleasure to have you with us. So,
may I just take just one more minute, just one question? Just came to my mind. Just how companies look for you. They are not coming asking for a scan on psychological safety, or they do that. I don't know. What are they looking for?
This week, I had 3 people pursuing us. There are people and organizations that are actually writing psychological safety into their mandate for people in culture change. But really, it's companies that particularly need innovation. So financial services, pharmaceuticals. So a pharmaceutical company in the United States did a long-term development of psychological safety initiative and lowered their development time from 5 years to 19 months. So
financial companies also?
And
that's what you meant?
Financial institutions, yeah, I work a lot with financial institutions. And yeah, that's a lot of agile companies. Anywhere where the sharing of information, or agile teams, a lot of companies where the sharing of information is necessary. They know that it's all soft skills. I mean, it's communication is soft skills. Leadership development is all about soft skills. I like to think of psychological safety as the measurement of the success of those soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
So could I just associate innovation and psychological safety? So
100%.
They need that. They need to be inclusive. They need to be able to work as a team, right? Contribution.
Yeah, they need to be allowed to
would
fail.
Be like a pillar.
Yeah. You need to be allowed to fail. Is it okay to fail in front of this group? Is a very specific question. And if it's not okay to fail, you're not going to bring up any new ideas. So innovation.
No, I remember one CEO saying the difference between thinking outside of the box and thinking outside of the company is very small. But be creative. Be creative.
Right.
So,
that's a good one.
I like that. That one's gonna get some legs, as they say.
okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
Hope
Thank
to
you,
see you
everyone.
soon again.
See you soon.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.